All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the EV Shopping Guide. I'm delighted to have today with us Joel Levin, who's Executive Director of Plug-in America, and I'm going to read his bio. Joel is a leading advocate for electric vehicles, clean energy, and effective climate policies. As I said, he's Executive Director of Plug-in America, where he is focused on continuing to build the nonprofit as the nation's consumer voice for EVs. Joel also is chair of the Global EV Drivers Alliance, because this is a worldwide movement, which links EV driver associations around the world. And he is a member of the Los Angeles Metro Sustainability Council. Prior to joining PIA, Joel served as Vice President for Business Development at the Climate Action Reserve, the state chartered nonprofit that runs North America's largest carbon offset registry. He drives, drumroll, a Nissan Leaf and mostly charges at home on a Clipper Creek. We're here today to discuss policy with Joel. So I'm going to do a little bit more reading so I get it right. Specifically, no surprise, we are going to discuss Biden's proposed EV funding. The president originally proposed $174 billion in EV funding. Part of that, around $15 billion, passed in the bipartisan infrastructure bill after a lot of sturm and drum, which a lot of us saw. But the majority of that money was included in the Build Back Better Act, which has not passed. So there's a possibility that this massive Build Back Better Act could get broken up into a lot of smaller bills. And so there is still a chance that EV funding could pass that way. So I'm just going to ask Joel where we are with all of that right now, and possibly the chances of success of all of that, many more billions of dollars going towards EV and EV charging.
Thank you, Zan. So it's great to be here. Good to see you again. Yes, so the Build Back Better Act, we strove mightily for it. We generated tens of thousands of emails from Plug-in America supporters to Capitol Hill and to the White House over it. But Build Back Better as a piece of legislation appears to be dead right now. Like, I don't think in that form it's probably going anywhere. However, the challenge has been, as you know, that there was a couple of U.S. senators, Democrat senators, who thought it was too big and were reluctant to vote for it. But there's been indications that the climate pieces of it, including the EV stuff that we support, seems to have broader support. And so there's some, I mean, there's a few different paths forward, and it's hard to know what exactly, where things are going to go. Excuse me, I'm going to adjust my screen a second. But there's kind of two potential ways that this could go. There's some talk about having a smaller version of the Build Back Better Act that would be primarily the climate change components of it, including hopefully most of the EV tax credit, things that we care about. Alternatively, those things may get bundled into the budget. So they're now working on a budget bill for the coming year, and it's possible that they'll give up on Build Back Better and they'll build this into the new federal budget. So it seems like everything we've heard is that the EV tax credits and the different EV things that we care about are not particularly, there's a few elements that are controversial, but on the whole, there seems to be broad support for them. So we're hopeful that they will find their way to the president's desk one way or another.
Great. I want to ask you in a minute to make a prediction on possible timing. But before that, can you just articulate what this would do if it gets passed for EVs and EV adoption specifically?
Sure. I mean, if it gets passed in the form, that it was before, it's the majority. You mentioned that $174 billion that the president had proposed. The bulk of that is in this bill. So if that went through, it would be a huge push forward for the EV market. It would really shift things very dramatically. We've the analogy that I've made before is that the U.S. has made big investments in the past to really shift the paradigm and push forward a new technology, such as like the moon program in the 60s, where John Kennedy said, we're going to land a man on the moon by the end of the decade. And they invested, an enormous amount of money. But at its height, there was 400,000 people working on various programs connected to the moon landing. And this would be on a scale with that. This would be, somewhat smaller, maybe 50–60% of what the moon program cost, but it would have a impact on society that would be much greater in terms of shifting all of our transportation to electric. There's just profound changes in the economy and in the environment, and getting rid of the big global footprint from petroleum. So it would have a profound change in society. So it's a big deal. It's a really big deal.
Wow. Had not heard it described that way before. And specifically, is it earmarked mostly for charging in disadvantaged communities, or incentives, or all of the above?
So the money for charging mostly went through already. So there was $7.5 billion that was specifically earmarked for charging. That was part of the infrastructure bill that got passed in November. And they're now, working on the rules for rolling that out. So I think you'll start to see charging going into the ground, hopefully by the end of this year, with some of that funding. This is a lot of it is EV purchase incentives and support for the industry transformation that needs to happen, in terms of retooling factories, building out an American battery industry. So right now, most EV batteries are manufactured in mostly China and a little bit in Europe, and relatively small amount is here. And the supply chain for batteries pretty much all runs through China. So all the various minerals around the world that go into EV batteries, a lot of them go through China for processing and then come here. So this would be trying to bring a lot of that supply chain to the US and build a kind of more robust supply chain. And then for heavy duty vehicles as well, part of it would be a 30% tax credit on purchases of buses, trucks, other kinds of heavy duty EVs. So that would be, obviously really, really important as well. So there's a whole kind of laundry list of things that are in the bill.
Very exciting. And this is why I'm remembering now, Biden was sort of selling this bill as not just about clean cars and a transformation, but remaining competitive with China rather than ceding all of that over there.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. So, manufacturing cars and all of the other inputs that go with that is a big business in the US. It's a big industry that employs, a couple million people, probably, depending on how you count the numbers. And if we don't invest in EVs heavily, in 20 years, we're probably not going to be making cars. We're going to be buying them from China and Europe and Japan and Korea and other people who are investing heavily in EVs. So it's not just about climate change and clean air. It's also about this really pivotal American industry. As the world is shifting really rapidly, we need to be on top of that. And also it's about the fuel as well. So we import so much of our fuel from overseas, and that money all flows out of the country to build this big, global footprint for petroleum. Instead of that, electricity is locally produced. Most electricity comes from not very far away from where it's consumed, and it's much more labor intensive rather than bringing stuff from around the world. When you invest in electricity, when you buy electricity, your money is going to your local utility, to local governments that very often own the utilities, to electricians, to solar installers. So it's building out the grid in your communities and hiring people to do that. So it's a really different investment of those fuel dollars.
That's a point, that we have been saying for many years, that particularly when the US was getting most of its gasoline from overseas, right? And I think it's such a great point that a lot of people aren't aware of. And this transformation that we're undergoing, what I usually point to as evidence of it is whole countries making commitments to ban sales of new gas cars, say by 2035, or even more impressive, the entire EU doing that. What is your favorite sort of point to as evidence of this transformation to electric cars?
Well, certainly the fact that most of the big automobile markets in the world have already announced phase out dates. 2035 is kind of the global date that has been adopted by the UN, and a lot of countries have picked up, and California is committed to that date, and a couple of other states in the US. And I think it's pretty achievable. I mean, the car companies are really gearing towards that. I mean, the US hasn't, as a country, committed to a date, but there may not be a lot of gas cars to buy by 2035 the way things are going. GM has said they won't be selling them, and a number of other car companies have committed to that as well. So it's remarkable when you see the huge commitments and huge investments that the auto industry is making to shift their production, and this is expensive. I heard someone say that capital investments are destiny in the auto industry. So when Ford talks about that they're going to make the biggest investment in their company's history in Blue Oval City, in this network of battery plants and assembly plants in Kentucky and Tennessee, that's they're married to that. When you make that kind of investment, that kind of shows what you're going to be producing in a few years. Those are big commitments.
And yet they still need government help in the form of these bills, huh?
Well, it's expensive. I mean, they're basically retooling everything they're doing. So yeah, I think it's okay to provide that kind of support.
And Plug-in America, as you so beautifully stated, is the voice of the EV driver. So how can we all continue to help all of those who are either members of Plug-in America or followers? And by the way, everyone should be a member. I will add that.
Thank you. Yes. So if get on our mailing list, if you're not on our mailing list, we do action alerts pretty often at the state or federal level. When there's something going on, we'll call on people to make their voices heard. If you can contribute money, that's great. That's appreciated. Get involved with National Drive Electric Week and Drive Electric Earth Day. Those are our two big annual events. Zan, I know you were sort of the visionary behind National Drive Electric Week, and those are the 2 times of the year when kind of everybody comes out, and it's an opportunity to talk about your EVs with newbies, with people thinking about buying an electric car. We did a survey this last year, and we found that more than half the people who come to National Drive Electric Week, it's their first time, so they're new to this. So that's really exciting. So for people who are passionate EV advocates, going to an ENDU event and talking to the people there is a great way to have sort of one-on-one interactions with new people who may never have driven an EV before, may not know any EV buyers, and can really, you can shape someone's decisions around that and sell a car.
When you said the first time, do you mean the first time to one of your events, or really to even get in an electric car?
It's the first time. The survey was it's the first time. Have you ever been to an ENDU event before? So more than half the people say no. But generally, people who haven't been to an ENDU event probably haven't driven an electric car either. There's an awful lot of people who have never been behind the wheel of an EV.
I have to say I'm super glad to hear that, because getting old, I don't want to preach to the choir, and that can happen often for all of us here. So super glad to hear that. Anything else, Joel? I'm going to be doing a Q&A, as you know, with your programming director for these 2 events coming up. But anything else we should know about Plug-in America?
For people who are EV drivers, one of the most powerful things you can do is talk about your car, share with other people. EV drivers are incredibly passionate about their vehicles. I don't need to tell you that. And we found that almost everyone who buys an EV was influenced by somebody. That generally when someone buys an EV, they know somebody or they were inspired by someone else who has an EV, and you can be that person. It's very rare that someone buys an EV completely in a vacuum where they don't know a soul who's driven one, who drives one. They've never been in one. They just out of the blue decided to buy one. So pretty much always there's an influencer, and you can be that person. So, think about that.
That's so important. I'm obsessed, of course, with how to get the word out. And I remember asking Chris Payne, actually, director of Who Killed the Electric Car, not long ago, like, okay, he's a master at communications, right? I said, so, what's the most effective method? And he said, pretty much the same thing. It's one neighbor to the next. And I find that, very labor intensive. It would be nice if we could just buy a bunch of advertising and get the job done. But honestly, I think it's almost like, how do you find a doctor? Not by, looking around online, but somebody who has had the experience. So on that note, we will say, keep spreading the gospel. And thank you so much for what Plug in America does, Joel.
Thank you, Zan. This was fun.
It was. Take care.
All right. Bye.
Bye.